Welcome to Chadev. The dedicated core here. Right. I don't know. It's fewer people. Maybe it's more scrutiny. Guess the rain and the weather's keeping people away. Somebody asked me last night, a few people actually, if we were still going today. I said yes. Show must go on. Yeah, true that. So, just keep it super brief today. Next week, we actually do have Will Wade coming at us, so come out for that. Last week I said that this week would be Will Wade. I was mistaken, sadly. So next week will be Will. And thanks to our sponsors, EPB, UTC, Carbon 5, Open Table. Am I forgetting anybody? If you would like your company to be mentioned at this point, come talk to me. We'd love to take your money. Other than that, everybody give Joey a round of applause.
You ready? All right. So I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to be talking about the new version of ASP still in beta. And I just want to kind of jump right into it. In the new version, they pretty much threw the baby out with the bathwater, rewrote the entire thing from the ground up. It's a new version, brand new from scratch. So new, in fact, that on one of the blog posts from one of the original developers, they actually changed the name just 48 hours ago, so it's no longer ASP.NET 5, it's now ASP.NET Core 1.0. So, I mean, I haven't even updated any of my code to reflect that, but I mean, so it's still in development. They're still going to be working out a lot of the bugs, but this is kind of what we have to look forward to. So, in the new version, kind of point out a couple of things. It's more node-like, so I know this group right here, probably more familiar with Node than other groups I would have been working with. So this, honestly, you guys would probably feel quite comfortable with. Everything is out on GitHub, which is kind of something new and different for Microsoft. All the new ASP.NET, the new .NET framework, Visual Studio Code, which is their editor that works on Windows as well as Mac and Linux. And that's the other thing. ASP.NET will work on Mac and Linux. So part of which, like I was saying, ASP.NET kind of incorporated some bits of Node in there. So kind of as an example, Yeoman, they actually created Yeoman templates, scaffolding templates. Oh, my computer's a little slow, but. Yeoman, what is Yeoman? Yeoman is a scaffolding engine. It's actually created for Node.js, but it's actually used to create a template cookie cutter for new projects. And the guys at .NET actually created Yeoman templates that have new ASP.NET stuff in it. I'm going to do a simple web app without authorization just to keep it simple.
Could you,
I can zoom in. Is that all right? So I mean, basically I just called it chadev, keep it simple, and it just pukes all these files out for you, plus a little bit of instructions on how to actually get it running. So I'm actually going to run all these real quick. while this is running, bookmark when you can docs.asp.net, and it'll give you all the instructions on how to install it, how to run it on Windows, on Linux, on Mac, to get all the builds and everything that you need to actually get it running. It's crowdsourcing documentation, so a lot of it's incomplete, but what's there, it's actually pretty good. It's better than the old Microsoft documentation that's been in the past, and I guess it's because it's actually written by real people and not by the engineers. But it'll walk you through how to set it up, how to use the .NET version manager to be able to switch between different flavors, I guess you can say, you know, what each flavor is. Did I? Sorry about that. Just to kind of demonstrate that it's working, I have it running just and so you can kind of see some of the logging that it's stuff is happening. Click on some of the links, stuff is happening. But if you're going to be doing anything with Microsoft, you're probably going to be working out of Visual Studio. So the rest of this, I'm just going to be doing exactly that, working out of Visual Studio. But just to kind of demonstrate what it looks like, I'm actually going to spin up a new one. Same thing as before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do it as empty because I want to keep it as bare bones as possible, just kind of demonstrate what it's doing, how it's doing it. I got a README HTML that they threw in there, clean up some of this stuff. I'm going to use that later on, so I don't want to delete it completely. So, take a looking down here, you have a static void main, so it actually has a application entry point. This is going to be a little bit different than previous versions of .NET. And this is a Lambda statement. It's just a new C#6 feature. Just ignore that. Just pretend it's a regular method. They keep changing stuff, and sometimes it doesn't really make it any more readable. But here it's actually calling, I'm going to run a new web application, passing as its type argument, because it's a generic, a class of startup. And notice it doesn't inherit from anything. It's just a class named startup. By convention, it's expecting two methods, configure services and configure. And again, since it's not inheriting anything, there isn't any kind of compile time thing to check that. It just assumes that it's there. But again, if you look at that docs website I mentioned before, docs.asp.net, it'll walk you through how to build this file and all the parts that you need to pass into it. And we're going to work with this a lot the rest of the time, but to demonstrate, app is a concept of an application pipeline. And again, this is something that you see a lot in Node, using the concept of middleware. And just as an example, kind of create my own ad hoc middleware client. So this would just be an example of a very simple middleware that you can write in process. So whenever it would run, it would just go into each one of these and run it. You can have, you can chain them, add more than one. So again, when I actually build and run it, you'll actually see the output, both of it running. Loads. But just to kind of demonstrate, here we have this HTML file. If I wanted to say access this HTML file, rename it to index to make it simple. If I deleted it, hold on. Notice I deleted it, and since I had this commented out, there's no middleware running. I actually got a 404 error. But put this back in, let's try it again, run it. I have no idea why I renamed everything lowercase. See, whenever I try to actually access the file, I still get hello world. And even though that file is there, it's still coming in as an app pipeline. It doesn't care what files I have in my directory. So what we got to do is we got to force it to. There's two steps that you would have to take to do that. One is that you see this www root folder, and that's something that's new in this particular version of ASP. This is exactly what it looks like. This is the root folder for content. So we would actually take it, drag, well, that's why it's not doing that. Drag it. And then when you expand it, it's underneath the www root folder. And then we also have to tell the app pipeline, add a middleware that tells it to, okay, you need to actually look for static files. Add the package, it's all in there. And now when you run it, pass an index. And now you get the file being served. Another thing too, and this is if you're ever troubleshooting this, something to keep in mind. The order in which these middleware components appear is going to be kind of important. So let's say, for example, I'm start it over again. So here I added a middleware called use default files, and I placed it before the middleware use static files. And the order of placement is going to be important. What it's actually going to be doing is, for whatever reason, I don't know why it's so important to have default in front of static, but it actually matters in this case. If I was to swap the placement, rerun it, refresh it, it doesn't see that index file. I have to explicitly type it. So when you're troubleshooting, this is one thing that's going to eat up a lot of people, trying to figure out what's going wrong is going to be the order of the middleware. I want to jump over to, I don't have a lot of time left, I want to jump over to a couple of other things. So anybody that's ever worked in ASP.NET before is going to be very familiar with these model folders, controller folders, view folders. The model folders it doesn't really matter. You can call it whatever you want. You don't even have to have the folder there. The controllers and views are something that ASP looks for. It's MVC, which is the content rendering application that sits on top of ASP. That's been around for only a few years, but this is kind of the default content rendering engine that sits on top of ASP. And just to run it, just to kind of show you the demo that I have. I got a simple Bootstrap app. Added a little validation. And this just demonstrates a simple form. But if we actually look inside, each one of these methods represents what's called an action. So whenever you open the website, you're going to be retrieving the page via get, and it's going to hit this method, return a view. The view is a helper method that's inherited from the base class. All it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, the name of this is home, so I'm going to look over in my views folder, look for a folder called home, and here I got a file called index. And so it uses conventions to resolve that. And then same thing down here. When you submit it, form via post, here it's smart enough to know, because I have this post attribute that's going to hit here. There's automatic model binding based on what's inside of my model class, which is just a simple class decorated with a few attributes to indicate, size and that the field's required. It does this model binding, returns a view. Here I'm passing a customized name, thank you, as well as the email model, just to demonstrate that here it's got this thank you file, and you look inside, you can actually see some of the bindings that's taking place. I'm going to skip ahead. So in my class, it wasn't really doing anything. I was simulating sending an email to a webmaster, but I wasn't actually, I just had it commented out. What I've actually done, I'm using Git. I have a branch that kind of fast forwards what it's doing. Here I actually created a dummy class debug email service with a single void for sending an email. And all it's doing is it's just dumping a string to the console line. An interface that it inherits from. Out of the box, this new version of .NET supports dependency injection, and that's something huge that's over its predecessor. Before, you would have to add a third-party dependency injection container in order to actually use this service. But here it's baked in. It's out of the box. I was showing you the application pipeline through this configure method. There's also this configure services method, which is also part of that spec. If you look on the docs website, it'll tell you how to lay this out as well. This configure services is used for configuring your dependency injection container. So here, scoped, you can do singleton, transient, or scoped. That the interface and then the implementation. And now when I actually go into my home controller, I'm resolving the interface through that dependency injection container, and then whenever that post method comes across, I'm actually applying it here. I'm sending it. Fast forward again, because there's something else that I think is even cooler than this. There is a change in how it does configuration. So here, anywhere in my application, I can drop JSON files. I actually created one called configuration. So if I wanted to, say, customize where this email is going, pres@whitehouse.gov, not whitehouse.com. In my startup, I can actually load this configuration. Here I have a configuration object. I'm building it up using a builder, add JSON file, specify the name, build it. And then a little bit of under the covers magic here. You can actually create an object that will automatically deserialize that configuration. I have it here, which is just a single string that holds the email address. And what that'll do is that it'll do two things. It'll deserialize it into this object, and it'll also allow you to inject, using the same dependency injection, into, oh, I don't have it there. I have it here. And passes in as options. So when actually, oh, there it is, email configuration, email address into the to slot right there. So it's actually pulling in the email that is being sent to out of this configuration. So at runtime, you can specify, whenever you send this email, where it can go to. So that's pretty nifty. And also, on top of that, you can specify, I don't have this in my dummy up code, but I can probably squeeze this in real quick. You can do environment-based configuration. So environment, that's it. So if I wanted to add a specific production versus development environment configuration, I can do it here. So all I've done here is I've allowed me to create a new JSON file. And then it'll actually overwrite based on my configuration. Actually, I would probably want to set this optional to true. That way it doesn't, I don't get a runtime exception when it doesn't find that file. So that's just kind of as an example of how you can use customizable configuration at runtime. And it'll help you as your project scales out. And also out of the box, it supports logging, which you do, again, down here in this configure. You can pass in, again, through its built-in dependency injection, a logger factory where you can specify how you want it to log. If you want to log it to a console, you want to log it to a file, you want to log it to the server event viewer, different ways you can do this. And through Magic, it'll actually allow you to, I don't have it in here, rats. Oh, that's because I have it in here. You can pass in, hear me? The instance of your logger into the class that you're actually doing it. So here, instead of, I changed it, so instead of just dumping it to a console, I'm actually using the logger that I'm passing in through dependency injection. That kind of gives you a taste of some of the things that have changed between the older version and the newer version. And if you're familiar with Node, you can see some of the, see how this has pulled some of the artifacts out of Node, use it for here. One thing I haven't showed you is that there's this odd dependencies thing right here, and this is new if you've ever used .NET before. But if you expand it, you see here's Bower, here's NPM. You can right-click it. I don't have it on this flavor, but either way, you can actually, I have show all files. You can actually edit the packages.json, and you can actually run npm on it, and it'll pull in the npm packages that you can use to, here in this case with Gulp, it's actually using it to minify JavaScript and stuff like that. And same thing with Bower, exact same thing with Bower. Here you got your, we got Bootstrap and jQuery. When you actually look inside, here it's got this lib folder where all these get dumped to. So that's one thing that's kind of nice about the new version of .NET is that they're, for client-side packages, they've dumped NuGet for resolving this, and they're going to start leaning towards using Bower. And then same thing, whereas there was some C# code that did all of the compacting of JavaScript files, they've dumped that in favor of Gulp and Grunt and stuff like that using NPM. So this is one really cool step that Microsoft's going towards to making everything more familiar, for lack of a better term, familiar for Node users. So I'm really excited about that feature. But for a lot of you, for a lot of the old school Microsoft ASP.NET that aren't used to using Node, they're probably going to struggle with this part of it. But I don't think anybody here will have that problem. So this was like a really quick crash course. I probably flooded your brains with a bunch of nonsense, and you guys have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. But if you guys have one takeaway out of it, or at least two takeaways out of it, three, Microsoft's open source. All this stuff that I've shown you is all on GitHub, except for Visual Studio. They like Node, and they use a lot of Node stuff in here, at least some ideas that they took from Node. I forgot what the third one was, but it's pretty cool too. Yes, sir. So there's no hooks for Apache. Since it's open source, I'm sure it'll be just a matter of time before there is one. Now, out of the box, there is still hooks for IIS, which is actually a good question. One thing too, and going on the same subject, one thing that you'll notice when you're looking at here, even though you have all these new JSON files, one thing that seems to be missing is web.config, which is kind of a standard artifact with. It is, but see, now I was going to get to that. The web config here is really just there for backwards compatibility on IIS. There's absolutely no bearing for having it there other than making IIS happy. So who knows, maybe future versions of IIS won't require it, and then they'll drop it all together. That's what I'm guessing. Same. There's some tricks, and I don't remember all the tricks. You can publish it to IIS. I know as far as your, oh gosh. Well, we don't publish There is. Besides IIS and Apache, there are other web servers that you can use. And take a look at Kestrel too. So in this new version, one of the things that they had was, is Kestrel. It's an actual command line based web server, very similar to Node, that they shipped out there. As a matter of fact, I can run Kestrel out of Visual Studio by dragging down and clicking web. If you remember, we were looking at startup. There was at the bottom this public stack void main. what it's actually doing is that this is actually being used to fire up a Kestrel server. So if I deploy this to IIS, this main method doesn't get called, but if I'm deploying it on Kestrel, then it does. So, you know, and again, I mean, it's still in its infancy. So right now, out of the box by Microsoft, there's only 2 solutions, and that's, well, not counting Azure. There's only 2 solutions, IIS and Kestrel. But going forward, because a lot of this is open source, they're going to be relying on a lot of third-party providers. You're going to see, you know, Apache hooks, and you're going to see other things like that in the future, I'm sure. Who else? It's a tough crowd. NBC hasn't changed a whole lot. There's one thing that's really sweet that they changed that I like personally. It's probably, in the grand scheme of things, not that huge of a change. I have no idea if I have any changes on here or not. I don't. I'll just do a quick demo because I don't want to take up everybody's time. But if I go into views, down at the bottom, I have a link that would take me back home. This is this is using the Razor programming language for generating these website or web pages itself. One thing that they changed, or actually, let me go back. This right here, this action link, all it's doing is just a class that's developing a hyperlink, right? This class spits out a hyperlink, but it's resolving. I'm calling the index action in my controller. And then it's kludgy because here I'm passing in a class attribute, you know, used for Bootstrap. You know, you got this method and you can assume what it's going to look like, but it's still kind of ugly. So, you know, one thing that they changed, we'll just leave this blank for a second. Yeah, it's an intel. So it would take you, basically you would want to have a link that would take you home, but you would lose the ability to create this dynamically. One thing that they added in this new version is still the ability to dynamically create this, but it's using server tags. You know, it's just like your, you know, for you guys that's ever used .NET, you know, 1.0, you know, 12 years ago, you know, run at server, familiar with that? This is similar, but it's ASP dash, thinking about it, I'll just help it out. Controller equal, what is it, home, and ASP dash action index. And it basically generates the same content. It's hard to tell in using this color scheme, but it actually changed the color of the tag itself. Instead of being a light blue, it's kind of a greenish blue now. But they did a little bit of color changing to try to give you a visual indication that, hey, this is a tag that's being evaluated on the server. But it's by adding these ASP dash attributes that tell you how to do that. So that's one thing that they added in the new version of MVC, and I like it because you have an idea of what it's going to look like. You don't have these scatterbrain mixes of you know of code with HTML. I mean, obviously you still do, but it reduces some of that, and you have a better idea of what it looks like. I like that feature. Yeah. I mean,
as opposed to
right, and I mean,
I know what you mean.
yeah, and it gives you more control over it and stuff like that.
That does the exact same thing?
Oh yeah, it generates the same thing. What it does is that it'll analyze the ASP controller and the ASP action. It'll say, okay, I need to generate an href that'll take me to this page. and it'll iron all that out before it renders it to the browser. Yeah. Depends on how you have it set up. I mean, you saw how I added a Boolean true for a parameter set optional. Basically, in this case, you know, your environment, you can declare what you want. Let me go back to the environment. It's basically a text value. It expects staging, production, or development, but since it's a string, you can call it whatever you want. And so you can name, you know, a perfect example would be something like unit testing. You know, there's no, you know, defined unit testing, but I can easily create an environment called unit testing and create a configuration for that. As long as you pass that, in the case of the JSON file, that you want it to be optional, don't croak if you can't find it, it'll just skip over it. You know, just handle it gracefully. The whole point on this one is that you're building your own configuration. You can do it however you want. Here I was just showing JSON, but it'll read XML. It uses a concept called secrets, where it'll actually create a JSON file outside of the source tree. So let's say you want to have a SQL Server connection string, but you don't want it to be stored in your source tree to be accessible, you know, by anybody perusing your source code. You know, that's a secret. You can keep it outside of your source tree, and you know, I guess it creates a directory that it knows where to look, and it'll load it from there. You know, and again, it's all in the docs, but it'll also use environment variables. So it's possible if you want to use, say, a store connection string inside of an environment variable and then load it up, that's conditional to that particular server that you're running it off of. You can do it that way as well. So it's the configuration system here is extremely flexible. And it's, you know, it just depends on how you program it. Anybody else? Yes, sir. So it is. Yeah, so basically the new version of ASP, how is it publishing?
Because that uses some of the
Yeah,
stuff too.
yeah.
So, because it's a little.
Well, I haven't, you know, because I'm not running this on any server, I haven't really played around that deeply into it, and you know, there's still some documentations. I think there's a really good plural site out there for it, and I haven't delved that deeply into it. One thing to note, though, is this new version of .NET has taken away from the monolithic .NET base class library. They really shrunk it down. All of the features that used to be in there are now in NuGet packages. So when you deploy it, you're essentially deploying this as a big, giant NuGet package with dependencies on your child NuGet packages that you're referencing inside of your project.json file. So it's changed. It's you know, it's not apples and oranges, or it's apples and oranges now. So a lot of the rules that you're looking for from the old version, you kind of have to change your mindset on that. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's worth looking into a lot more, you know, a lot deeper than what I could probably answer in what little time we have left. So, but a good place to start is that docs website. Again, I mean, it's incomplete, it's user contributed, but it's really readable, really easy to parse and stuff like that. I guess I don't see any more hands, so I guess that's it.
All right, let's give him a round of applause. Thanks, Joey. Next week, we will be back, same time, same place, and with Will Wade. So join us again. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.